Good evening. It is now at around 6 past 7 in British time, and this is RBC Spotlight. I'm Jay, your host tonight, and with Johnny and Giorgio, the RBC brings to you today's topic around Ukraine. Spotlight is a show where we hold debate and discussion on Roblox about pressing issues and topics real life that matters to you. Tonight we'll cover on Trump's controversial meeting with Zelensky, European Leaders Summit and the pathway to peace in Ukraine. I'm glad to welcome Seb, Labour and Cooperative campaigner member, George, law student and political specialist, Jason, Tory member and political student, and Aidan, history student. Nice to see you all.
Yes, good to see you too.
Thank you for having me.
So, the first question is this. A question from Blue. With Trump in power, do you feel like a nuclear war is more or less likely to happen than before? Let's start with you, Seb.
Thank you. This was one of my key concerns going into the last US election, whether or not Trump is more likely or less likely to start a war with Russia than Joe Biden was. Ultimately, I do think it is less likely due to the sheer fact that for some reason Trump and Putin get along really well, and it's simply now with a Russian puppet in the White House that ultimately, compared to Joe Biden, the chances of a nuclear war with the West for Russia have dramatically sloped.
Thank you. What about you? What's your opinion, Aidan?
I think that nuclear war is a lot less likely now that Donald Trump is back at the White House. I think, although many people will be opposed to his negotiation tactics in Ukraine, if hypothetically a peace deal was secured in which Ukraine had to give mild territorial concessions, that would be at the very least a peace and would therefore ensure that there wasn't this proxy war between the West and between Russia. And although we don't like a lot of people don't like Donald Trump's rhetoric or perhaps some of his phraseology regarding foreign policy. The truth is that when he was the president, he was the first president in 40 years not to start a new war. And for all of his showboating, he is actually the much better candidate for peace, opposed to Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, who spent and sent hundreds of billions of dollars to Ukraine and said they would go indefinitely, which bleeds the American taxpayer money whilst also funding a never-ending war.
Thank you. And what about you, Jason?
Yeah, I also think it's pretty much impossible. I think it's because Trump's policy on war is
Sorry, we can't hear you that clearly.
1 second, sorry, I'll just quickly switch to microphones.
But before that, can we have the opinion from George yourself?
Yes, of course. As much as everyone here, my thoughts about Trump are a bit less than the people we just spoke to. His approaches to the financial and normal problems and political problems that we currently have in Ukraine are a bit more of a situation that Trump might think. The indefinite and ways that he's handling it is not really something I agree with, but it's also not really something that that I would be against, as till now he has handled the war quite well, as much as his predecessor. But I think nuclear options are always on the table, and I think Putin himself has stated multiple times that he would take action if his life would be to be taken. But yeah, no, for now, I don't think nuclear options are available to both parties.
Thank you. And the last one goes to Jason. Jason.
Can you hear me like this?
Yes, very well.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, like you were saying,
Yes,
sorry. Pretty
go
much
on.
nuclear cards out on the table. Trump's been pushing for peace diplomatically quite well, actually. And there's no sight of a nuclear war actually happening, and de-escalation is happening. So that's a really good thing, actually. Also, with
Okay.
the other points that Trump's never actually started a major war before, which is yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, all. So, what's everyone's opinion on Trump, really? Do you believe he is a president? Well, some people calling him a president that leads to more destruction to Americans' place, or even to international relations itself. Some people believe he hails him as some sort of hero that's able to stop many wars ongoing, whether that's Palestine and in Gaza, in Israel, or whether that's in today's topic in Ukraine. So, what's your opinion on Trump's foreign policies? Let's start with you, George.
Sorry, can you repeat the question real quick?
So some people hail Trump as some sort of savior of foreign policies,
Oh,
able to end
yeah,
wars, and
I remember.
some people believe that Trump is harmful to world peace and world relations, or to the West indeed. What's your opinion on Trump? Which side are you more so prone to? Which side do you
Well,
more so
my
take on?
opinions on Trump are widely based on the worldwide media, currently centrally based in Europe. Something that has been
World
happening
relations.
in the United States is that most definitely the more wider public has been massively protesting, while the main media views, like Fox News and others, are more of scared to post those uh, post the my goodness, I am not able to speak right now. Anyway, those most media outlets are unable or incapable or scared currently to show that people are protesting. They are scared because they believe that Trump will kick them out of the White House press conference room. My opinions on Trump are widely based on that, as freedom of speech has definitely been suppressed, and the war in Ukraine is not really helping, as his policies that he has stated are good, but they're also bad at the same time. They are supportive, but not too supportive that it can help in the long run. Mostly what Trump is doing is our intimidation tactics. While I've not seen him yet actually solve issues. He's more of stating issues in the interviews that he takes instead of actually explaining how to solve them. Till now, my views on Trump are not that great.
I see. So, do you agree with him? Do you agree with him, George? Sorry, no, not George. Jason, do you agree with him, Jason? Whether do you think Trump is a savior or is he a villain?
I think Trump's a savior. I'm thinking this because what he said. Let's just say tariffs, right? He's putting the American people first and the American economy first over other people's, rather than benefiting other countries. He's actually putting America first, where other democratic leaders wouldn't.
Well, other democratic, I see. Well, other democratic leaders, in his comparison, with Trump's comparison, are definitely very different. Trump is very different amongst all the world leaders that we have today. But how can we say more sort of diplomatically, not just domestic policies? Diplomatically, what do you think Trump is doing, and what do you think he wants to do? And do you think he's trying to act as a hero, or do you think he's trying to mess things up and act as a villain?
Sorry. But yeah,
Jason,
I still think he's trying to be a hero. He's scaring other countries to do what he wants, pretty much, and that's how you actually get things done. Let's
I
just say,
see.
he was threatening to invade Iceland, Greenland. You know, I would say that was a good thing, although it was quite hostile. It pushed other NATO countries to increase their defense budget. Like the UK, they're increasing their defense budget by 2.5%, which is good. You know, he's accomplished his goal there.
I see. Thank you. What do you think about it, Seb? Do you think Trump is a hero or a villain?
Well, it's simple, really. Trump is a villain. He was his first term, and he is currently. And let me also clear up the claim that Trump is a peacemaker. He's not. The peace in Gaza was achieved under the last government led by Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, respectively. And Trump had potentially some input, but ultimately he was not the president then. And as we can see now, with the White House meeting with Zelensky, Trump is failing to deliver peace in Ukraine. And I just want to address Jason on his support for the Trump tariffs. Here's what's happening with Trump. He puts on major tariffs on Canada or Mexico. Then he goes back to his advisors. His advisors tell him he's messed up, and then Trump backs down. Tariffs aren't helping the economy under any circumstance. What it's doing is creating a competitive consumer market, causing prices to be raised, and we see this especially. One of the key things of Trump's election was day one we're gonna get egg prices down. Since January the 20th, 2025, egg prices have risen in America. And it just as simple as Trump isn't working with world leaders, he's not working with his advisors, he's not working constructively with the opposition, and that is why I believe firmly Trump is a villain.
Okay, thank you. And what do you think, Aidan? Is Trump a villain or a hero?
Well, I think both are quite charged terms, but in terms of securing peace in the world, he's definitely more of a hero. And again, I think we need to compare him to previous presidents. One of my colleagues spoke about Joe Biden, but we have to remember that it was under Joe Biden in which Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine. It was under Barack Obama in which Crimea was taken, and it was under George Bush in which Georgia was occupied. And I think, again, we need to look at Barack Obama causing devastation in Libya, George Bush causing devastation in Iraq and Afghanistan. And these things matter because a lot of these things completely destabilize the Middle East, helping cause many of the conflicts we see today. And regarding Trump, most Democratic politicians nowadays like to use antagonistic phraseology to describe the Russians. But at the end of the day, if we want a peace deal instead of never ending war, we have to negotiate with the Russians. We have to negotiate with our adversaries because there's no point calling them names and insulting them and funneling trillions and trillions and trillions, because then you'll have a never ending war, which will then make American taxpayers and European taxpayers feel like they're funding a war whilst their immigration crisis is happening, whilst there's a housing crisis, a cost of living crisis, a crime crisis. And regarding the tariffs, I mean, the United States has large trade deficits with many parts of the world, and a lot of Americans feel like they're getting ripped off. And whether tariffs are good for the economy or bad for the economy, there is substantial evidence that indeed the manufacturing sector would have been more protected by tariffs. And you could just see that in the 1980s, how a lot of American jobs in manufacturing, blue collar jobs, were lost. I think that is more of a domestic policy, though. But regarding foreign policy, I think Trump is definitely a hero for peace across the world.
I see. Thank you. Well, I see it was mentioned on tariff, but more also on increasing defense spending. It is correct that the Labour government, the new Labour government, just announced a new rise on defense budget, of which they will soon present a so-called emergency budget in Parliament soon, later this week, I believe. So what is your thought mostly? Is it possible, which is a question from Blake, by the way, which is very connected, is it possible for NATO and other organizations like the EU to actually successfully fund the peacekeeping in Ukraine, or, in his opinion, to fund Ukraine even without US support? What do you think? Let's start with George.
Well, a possibility for the UK to provide aid to especially allied countries has always been on the table. I myself question sometimes why it has not been done before, since World War II. Although, well, it has been done after World War II, but not at a mass scale. For a country to fully support another country to provide aid, a lot has to be sacrificed, especially the work manufacturing workflow of what the country normally handles. But most importantly, I do not really personally see the UK funding Ukraine to fight a war against Russia. Trump mainly is trying to sort peace deals. Trump has been a businessman for the most of his life. He grew up as a businessman in New York. I believe that a deal can be made. I just don't think that the Trump administration is the best way or the best people to deal with this. Of course, you have Doge, led by Elon Musk, which is also paying a heavy toll on the US government. But currently, I think the main form of funding that Ukraine will be getting is most definitely Trump, but to where ties have to be taken to between Ukraine and the United States. But the possibility that UK can fund Ukraine is definitely on the table, and it's possible. Although I don't see the UK government doing it for now.
Okay, thank you. Now comes to you, Jason. What do you think? Do you think the UK and NATO and Europe are able to support Ukraine to fight this war, or indeed support Ukraine in the peacekeeping without US support?
Well, to be honest, yeah, I do think Europe can pay and sustain Ukraine to continue fighting this war. Although I don't really agree with it, Europe is a strong continent, and after all, we are all allies. But peacekeeping in Ukraine, I don't exactly agree with it. I think things should be held diplomatically instead of through war and placing troops in Ukraine. Another thing about those Doge findings. Sorry, I forgot what your name was, but I do think Doge is also a good thing. You know, they found a lot of bad things that would be in Spain. Like spent, I think it was like $8 million spent on like transgender rats or something like that. But I just think Doge are doing some good. Yeah.
Okay. Right. Right. Let's go now to Seb. Seb, what do you think? Can we as Europeans support Ukraine without US involvement?
My response to this is mixed, and I believe that hypothetically, Europe can support Ukraine to mass amounts without the US. However, after the sudden concerning aid cuts to Ukraine we saw recently from the US, it made Europe realise that Trump's not just using words, he's putting it into action now. And ultimately, if Europe needs to aid Ukraine, this needs to rapidly start going up. Ukraine needs more aid to defend itself, from the illegal Russian invaders. That even just today, Ukraine faced a mass drone attack which killed multiple people, if I recall correctly, and without the US aid that it has received over the past 3 years, I believe, then Ukraine, the situation would be very different. And whilst Europe can aid Ukraine on its own, it needs to rapidly increase its aid to Ukraine. And ultimately, that is one of my criticisms of putting the aid budget to fund the defence spending in the UK. As well, I do believe in a increase in defence funding across the UK, especially after a report several years ago came out saying that the UK isn't prepared for war. This ultimately the money has to come from somewhere else, probably through the tax, preferably on rich people. Ultimately, Ukraine is surviving on aid, and Europe can aid Ukraine, but it needs to be dramatically higher if Trump really is going to go through with his little phony rants on his social platform or whatever it's called. If the US does withdraw aid, Europe needs to step in to fill that massive hole before Ukraine falls into.
Okay, let's go. Oh, he muted himself. So let's go to let's go to Aidan. What do you think? Can we, as Europe and as European NATO countries, being able to aid Ukraine ourselves independently? A question from Blake.
I think that we probably could, but the question is whether we would have the willpower to do so. The European economy is strong, I think 20 trillion or over $20 trillion. But when we look at some of the governments in Europe, we look at the Italian government, we look at the pressures from the right in the British government, and we look at the developments in France, in Germany, and in many Eastern European nations, there is a sizable population of Europe who doesn't want to increase funding for Ukraine and who thinks that it's not our affair and we should instead spend our money better at home. The UK spends about 2.5% of its GDP on defence spending, and that could theoretically be doubled to 5% of GDP. So that would be tens of billions of pounds a year, which many people would see as going instead to not fund the NHS, police, schools, and other parts of life. So realistically, although we have the financial capabilities to do so, I don't think that we could step up and double spending because America funded about as much as Europe. We would have to roughly double spending. And I don't think that there's the willpower in our nations to do that.
Actually
Thank you.
wish to add on to that. Something that the Dutch government recently did. A bill was passed in the European Parliament in Strasbourg, in France, to where every country has to pay a certain amount to upgrade their military. That bill was passed in the European Parliament, but was later denied by my country's government, the Netherlands, as a large part of our government is handling mostly R&D, research and development, and financing mostly medical studies. We do not really care for a boosted up military. We're mostly focusing on what is more important on other world-like issues.
Okay, thank you. Who haven't I asked? I believe I haven't asked. Have I asked you, George?
I think you did.
I think we did. So I think we should move on to the next question. Right. So the next question is from Simon. So what role actually would China play in the Ukraine-Russian war? Would they be a force of good or would they be a force of evil? That was what he submitted to me, a news report from Phoenix Media, it was Chinese state media, when they had been reporting and interviewing Ukrainian soldiers, which could be seen, as he suggested, as a change of their attitude. So, what do you think the Chinese state would play in the Ukraine-Russian war? What role would they play? Let's start with you, George.
Actually, first want to hear the comments of my other colleagues.
Sorry?
I first would like to hear the comments of my other colleagues before I step in and say something.
Great. Let's start with you, Aidan.
I think it's an interesting question and one that people don't talk about a lot. The truth is that the Russians and the Chinese have a very strong dependence on each other, especially regarding trade. So naturally, one would presume that the Chinese could enter the war in Ukraine as a force of evil. I do think there is a stronger level of ambivalence naturally because of geography towards the war in Ukraine in Asia. You see nations like India and China taking a much more neutral stance. And indeed, China is very focused on its own foreign affairs, especially regarding Taiwan. So I don't know. I don't know. I think North Korea is a more interesting question, perhaps because there's much more evidence of North Korean troops being on Russia's side. But we will have to see in the next couple of years if the war in Ukraine will improve Russian Chinese relations or whether it will hinder it. Because the Chinese don't seem as supportive as the Russians in the war. But if the Russians could get the Chinese to help militarily, or even strategically, that would be a big benefit to them.
I see.
Actually,
Then go to
now
George.
yes, I very much agree with Aidan. I also view the North Korea as a bigger problem for now, as the Chinese government is focused on other things currently. Although mainly, something that I found kind of hilarious is that when North Korean soldiers came into effect and were sent to Ukraine, they were found to finally having Wi-Fi and were jerking off to specific things and
George,
content.
sorry, George. 13% of audiences are under 13. So,
Oh my goodness.
yes, but that is actually true, by the way.
All right, let me specify my answer. The North Korean soldiers are too busy doing other things while in Ukraine. Yes, their military aid is a problem in Ukraine, although the North Korean government isn't that helpful in aid, as it's quite known that the government of North Korea is quite poor, and the way it gets its money is from mafia laundering and falsely buying and selling stuff all over the world. They have a debt to pay still to Sweden for buying a certain amount of vehicles from Sweden that has still not been paid to this day. I think that China's role in this war is definitely very small and is very dependent on what the Chinese government and the Russian government come to terms with in the future.
Thank you. Let's save the other things that the North Koreans are doing to after the debate. But let's now go to Jason. What do you think, Jason? Would China be a force to peace or would China be a force to conflict?
Yeah, well, I agree with the other colleagues. It's quite hard to predict what China will do during this war since they've been so quiet and quite neutral about it, really. But overall, I think there would be a quite a bad force. You know, they would support the ally Russia, and if they needed to, they would probably go to war for them. But yeah, it's quite hard to disappear what they're trying to do, though.
Thank you. Let's ask Seb. What do you think? Would China be a force of good or source of war?
Well, first to answer this question, we had to look at China's relations with Russia, and that is the PRC is overtly pro-Russian. It's allied with Russia on numerous occasions. They're in BRICS together. It is not hard to see for anyone that the Chinese government is doing everything it can to support the Putin regime. I must say then that during the Russian invasion of Ukraine, China did say it respects Ukraine's sovereignty, but it also supports Russia's non-concerns about the enlargement of NATO. Ultimately, the Russians had just used the card of the enlargement of NATO to say this is a valid justification, which is not. NATO is not threatening Russia under any circumstances. We also had to look at, following the invasion, that China abstained from the United Nations vote that condemned the invasion, and China has attempted to mediate peace, although this peace is overtly for Russia. China has objected to sanctions against Russia. China has supplied Russia's invasion. China has promoted Russian disinformation. It is overtly clear that China is on one side of the conflict, and that's Russia's. China has also reportedly asked Putin to delay the invasion, meaning they knew it was going to happen and they did nothing to stop it. If China wanted peace, they would have held Russia to account on this, and that they would have held it and presented it to the international community to prevent it earlier.
Okay,
And it's
thank you
simple
very
as.
much. Thank you so much. Right, let's be quick on the other answers. I think we still have Seb, you're the last one. So I think we do not have any more pre-submitted questions. We have some audience questions coming through right now at the live, and we have a question from Right, we have a question from Toddy. Toddy asked, what do you guys feel about the 30-day ceasefire deal from Ukraine, which Russia haven't agreed with yet? Let's start with you, George.
Sorry, can you repeat the question one more time?
What is your opinion about the 30-day ceasefire deal from Ukraine that Russia have not agreed to yet?
I have not really read into the 30-day peace ceasefire deal yet. I've not really investigated the matter yet, as I've been busy with other things. Although, from what I'm hearing from you, that Russia did not accept the deal, I honestly do not find that very surprising. Russia has been denying to talk with other people and other governments throughout the war. Only when Trump came in power, the Russian government said that they might come into talks, although I still don't think that the Russian government is planning to help discuss or end the war anytime soon.
Okay, let's go with you, Aidan. What do you think? What do you think about the 30-day ceasefire deal from Ukraine? I'm also searching for the deal itself, the text, the wording of the deal itself from my phone, and I'll update you accordingly.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
So obviously this has only become recent news. We'll have to see whether the Russians wish to cooperate with the Ukrainians and the Americans in engaging with it. Obviously, a ceasefire is definitely a step in the right direction, but we don't want a situation like there is in Israel and Gaza, whereby there is a ceasefire, but then there are constant violations of it. And I think this ceasefire shouldn't be seen as the end, but rather this is a crucial 30 days to build more fundamental stepping stones. And instead of politically convenient step-by-step plans, there needs to be a complex negotiation in which clear boundaries are set for both nations. And unfortunately, a likely situation which could perhaps arise is there is a ceasefire, but then if the Ukrainians don't perhaps give enough concessions, then the ceasefire would end, and then there would be the narrative amongst the right, amongst the Russians, and perhaps amongst some of the Trump administration, say that Zelensky didn't want peace. He had a ceasefire, he had a chance to negotiate peace, but he didn't take it. So we need to make sure if a ceasefire is achieved, that it is a time to have a good peace deal, one that doesn't violate the sovereignty of Ukraine too much, but also appreciates that peace is definitely the main goal that we need to achieve.
Okay, thank you. Before we move on, it is just to correct something, the 30-day peace deal, which ceasefire deal, is
I would like
technically
to.
from the American government.
I would
So
definitely like to speak in. Definitely, definitely agree with Aiden. During this 30-day, if it is ratified by the Russian government, a 30-day ceasefire would definitely lay the grounds for fundamental issues to be resolved in a short amount of time. We're talking about getting casualties out of war zones, and we're talking about setting deals for in the future. But I think taking care of casualties and wounded is definitely one of the most important, as till now Russia has ignored a bunch of fundamental issues and ignored a bunch of international laws that are meant to help the wounded in war. Although till now we have only seen Russia take prisoners of war, taking in and punishing them. It's not been great, but I definitely agree with Aiden that this is a stepping stone to something that can be improved.
okay, thank you. What about you? What's your opinion, Jason?
I ultimately think this is a good idea, really. Well, on the question that will Putin actually accept the ceasefire, I think he will. I think Trump will put enough pressure on him to accept it. But this is a good step. This is a good way forward to peace. Loss of life will pretty much stop. Humanitarian aid access will start coming in to help more people. It's be good.
Thank you. Right. I've just talked to Johnny, the crew team, and it's decided because our time is running slightly tight, we will impose the 60 seconds arrangement for every delegate we have.
5 minutes.
Yeah. So now the question comes to you, Seb. In 60 seconds, would you say, what do you think of the 30-day ceasefire deal proposed by the US government on Ukraine, which Russia have not yet agreed on?
I welcome the plan. I do think, unlike the Gaza ceasefire, it does need more regulations to prevent war from starting again. But with the question of will Russia accept it, a simple answer is no. Russia wants to continue this war. They have done at all opportunities for peace. The main aim of the Russian invasion is simply to cause pain to the innocent Ukrainian people, and it's simple as, well, the Russian government, when it sets peace, it is welcoming to see some being proposed.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, let's come to the other question from the audiences about, in fact, cost of livings. If this wars continue, would the cost of living crisis that many European countries faces now, including here in the UK, would it get worse over time as this war continues, or would it be a different situation with this war even going on? What do you think? Let's start with Aidan.
I mean, naturally, the cost of living crisis would continue to be bad. We have a situation whereby, if you even look at the increase in defense spending, we only have 0.3% of the aid budget left. So, hypothetically, if we had to hike up military spending to 3% of GDP, where would that money come from? It would come from our hospitals, our schools, our police stations, our transportation services. So the cost of living crisis is naturally perpetually continued by war. And not just because we have to increase defense spending, but also because we have less economic flexibility to deal with the Russians. Russian oil and gas isn't as much of a problem here as it is in many continental European nations. But naturally, if it's bad for the European nations' economies, it may also be bad for our economies. And the chance of a general European recession would be very, very bad for us, even if we have left the European Union. Yeah.
Thank you. Now let's come to Jason. What do you think? Do you think that do you think the cost of living crisis will continue as the war continue, or will it not?
I think it would continue really. Yeah, because like we're gonna have to spend more money on defense to help Ukraine, and also the we're gonna have to do that. And Ukraine also acts as an energy transit hub for other European countries, where if that's blocked and we can't get to it, other countries are going to have to find other ways to import energy, which is going to cost more. And effectively, the taxes are going to have to rise. But yeah, I do think cost of living will dramatically increase over time.
I see. Thank you. Now, what's your opinion, Seb?
Can you repeat the question again? Sorry.
So, will the cost of living crisis continue to exist as long as the war in Ukraine exists, or are they not? Are they two different things?
Well, the cost of living crisis, everyone admits, was the Ukraine war was a factor in that. But ultimately, compared to other European nations, their cost of living went down faster, their inflation went down faster, and ultimately, the main reason for why the cost of living is so bad is that is due to Brexit and the previous government's poor handling of the COVID-19 pandemic. If you look compared to EU countries, our economy is doing much worse than theirs, and it's simple as Ukraine is one of the factors, but the cost of living crisis will continue even if the war ends.
Okay, thank you. Let's come to George. What do you think? Would the cost of living crisis continue as long as this war exists, or are they two completely different things?
Living crisis, accordingly to countries. No, the costs of housing and the costs of definitely paying taxes for housing has been raising for the last few years, definitely not only due to the Ukrainian war, but also due to the growing migration problem in definitely the whole wide world. There are a lot of factors that should be taken in, and I myself definitely think that because of the high level of immigrants, we should be able to give these people that run away from home because they don't feel safe in their home country, we should be able to give them a safe place to live, eat, and sleep. Although, because of the growing crisis of housing and the shortage of housing, definitely in my country, the Netherlands, it has become a problem. And the normal citizens of our nation has definitely paid a toll to that. Our current government, far right, is trying to minimize the amount of immigrants that come into our borders for about a year now. Although I don't much agree with it, the standards that are needed to enter the European Union also have to be taken into account. But the costs of living has definitely gone up a ton since the 2000s. Yes.
Okay, thank you
Um,
very much.
can I
Thank you
can I
very
just
much.
say something,
Yes.
Jay, quickly? I reject the idea that I think Seb made about Brexit having been a massive contribution to the cost of living crisis, especially
Oh, for
considering
God's sake.
Oh,
how
I definitely agree with Aiden on that one. It's not only Brexit
No,
that
no. It was.
especially when you
It
look at the fact
wasn't.
that the UK spent £400 billion on a COVID-19 recovery plan, and
yes.
there were billions and billions of pounds lost in fraud. And if America had a cost of living crisis but didn't have Brexit, if Germany, France, Italy, Spain, and by the way, if you look at the German economy, we're going to outgrow the German economy next year, and trade is up with the European Union since we left. There's more imports, there's more exports. So I fundamentally reject
That's
the idea that.
definitely true. Brexit
Can
has
I? Can I?
it's. I
It's,
definitely
allow Seb. Do you allow Seb to respond to it? What do you think? Is EU is leaving EU, is Brexit itself a cost of or a cost of a lot of living crisis here in the UK?
Yes, ultimately the EU did a lot to help slow down on the cost of living in the UK. Um, it's not just Brexit that caused this cost of living crisis, but Brexit definitely made it worse than other countries. Um, it all comes back to the fact that we did send the EU money each week. We ultimately got more money back, and now that lack of money in the economy is contributing to a worse cost of living across the UK.
Okay, thank you very much. Right. Well, we can agree to disagree, but the debate is more so about Ukraine. So I have extra
well,
questions about it.
I definitely because
Do
the
you
question was
insist, George?
I definitely insist because the question you asked that was asked from the player's perspective and the people that are watching RBC, to where you gave that question to us. You asked us, did Brexit have an effect on housing costs? You asked us that question, and now you say, oh well, but the debate has to
Okay,
be
right.
about
It's not a
Ukraine.
debate against me, so don't go have a go on me. It's a
I can
debate
debate
on
whoever the hell I want, to be honest.
okay, right, George. You're allowed to have 30 seconds to speak. Go on.
No, that's all. Thank you.
Is that, what? How does this thing work? Okay, right. Let's get
It
to
works.
the other
Trust
because
the
we
process.
do. I'm sorry, George. We do have other audiences' question. We got about 10 of them. Uh, and I can't do all of them, but we can see some good question from. Sorry. Yes. We got a question from Carter. Will funding to Ukraine continue? Do you think funding to Ukraine should continue? If it after a ceasefire is met to rebuild perhaps Ukraine or to keep peace. What do you think about it, George? If you like to speak that much.
I'm going to keep my answer short with this one, as we only have 5 minutes left. I believe that we should keep funding to Ukraine, although we have to definitely make sure that ties are set between the nations and parties to make sure that we make sure that this war ends as soon as possible.
Okay, thank you. Aidan, what do you think?
I think if we are to continue funding Ukraine, we do need to cut the funds quite a fair bit. We do have a situation in this country where living standards for the past 15, 20 years have been stagnant, and I think we need to prioritize British workers and British citizens, which was a big reason why 17.4 billion people voted to leave the European Union. And we have a situation whereby if we fundamentally want peace, one person who said he will fight for as long as it takes is Volodymyr Zelensky. So if a ceasefire is agreed, Zelensky needs to realize that we cannot fight forever, and he cannot fight forever using British, European, and American taxpayer money.
Okay, thank you. What do you think, Seb? Seb?
Well, ultimately, Ukraine is relying on the aid that is given to them, and if we stop the aid, Ukraine will fall and there'll just be another Russian puppet in Europe, further putting more threat on NATO to putting threat on NATO of a potential war. And if we, in response to the point that a lot of people voted to leave the European Union, the vast majority of polls now are saying if that vote were to happen today, it wouldn't pass. So it's no longer worth arguing that
I see. Thank you.
to remain out.
I see. You get your point. Thank you very much. Let's come with Jason. We are running out of time. So, Jason, what do you think? Should we continue to fund Ukraine after the war ends?
I think we should fund them with humanitarian aid for instead of military, so that they can rebuild quickly. But during the ceasefire, if it does happen, on the question that will funding continue, I think it will. I think EU countries will absolutely pump Ukraine with military equipment, so that once the ceasefire ends and Russia continues its attack, Russia will be faced with a much heavier resistance. And do I think we should continue funding Ukraine? I don't think we should, no. I think we should prioritize our own interests first, no matter what. And we can't really criticize Russia for invading them when we did the same thing during the British Empire.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, should we go to the last question from the audiences, which is, do you believe that actually Russia would attack Ukraine even during a ceasefire? It's a yes or no question, so have a short answer. So let's go with you, George.
Yes.
They will. And Jason?
Yes.
And Seb?
Of course, yes.
And Aiden?
Can you repeat the question really quickly?
Would Russia attack Ukraine if it's even during a ceasefire?
No.
No. Okay. You're the only one with a different opinion, so can you elaborate?
Because if the Russians attacked Ukraine during a ceasefire, that would damage their PR to the parts of the world that believe that the Russians want peace and the Ukrainians are the ones who are continuing the war indefinitely. So even from an optics perspective, I don't think it would be in the Russian interest, especially considering a ceasefire which would include a peace deal could be advantageous for everyone, but especially the Russians.
Okay, thank you. Anyone wants to respond to that from a yes side? George?
Nope.
Okay, right.
Well, I would, but we do not have time left, so.
Okay, wait. We do not. Right,
No,
indeed, you're right.
no,
We do not have
just-
time left. Now it is 8 p.m. So it marks the ending of today's debate. We have a great debate on the cost of living crisis with the war in Ukraine. We have a great discussion about North Korea and China and the role of the Ukrainian war. We also have a great discussion on Brexit actually and NATO and the stance of Europe. What should we actually do in this situation, and indeed a future glance to ceasefire. Now, as we're running out of time, sadly, we cannot take everyone's question, but I do have to, as my crew have absolutely insisted that I mention this. In the next few days, another Spotlight episode would be released in regards to Eurovision. On Sunday, the biggest ever to the RBC headquarters update would release, which will include the studio you are in right now, and as well as many different stories from the RBC putting you on live on news, not only on in real life but also on Roblox, in a very contemporary Robloxian manner. And I wish everyone luck, and thank you very much to everyone for their participation in this debate. Let me repeat the list of the guests. Seb, Labour and Cooperative Manager, campaigner and member. George, law student and political specialist. Jason, Tory member and political student. And Aidan, history student. Thank you very much all for joining, and we will see you very soon. Thank you.